Welcome to Count Me In. In this episode, we are joined by the innovative Siqi Chen, CEO of Runway, and a 4-time CEO and 3-time founder. With a rich background in math, technology, and product management, Siqi shares groundbreaking insight into leveraging AI for enhanced work efficiency and intuitive thinking tools. We discuss the nuances of prompt engineering, Runway's revolutionary approach to AI, and the importance of design and financial planning. Siqi contrasts traditional tools like Excel with cutting-edge solutions, aiming to democratize financial data access and improve collaboration across organizations. Tune in for an engaging conversation that promises to reshape how you think about AI, financial modeling, and the future of work. Well, Siqi, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast, and we're going to be talking a lot about, FP&A and financial planning within organizations, but I want to talk a little bit about your story because you don't have the normal, starting or running an organization, a financial organization story. You're not a typical, hey, I started and did my accounting with Deloitte or KPMG and, kind of went up that way. You don't have that typical story. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your story first.
Yeah, happy to share. You're right. This is my first time running a finance org and building anything in B2B, much less in finance software. My background is in math. I majored in math, in fact, and it's mostly in technology. So my first job during college was working on the Mars rovers at JPL in machine vision. And over the course of my career, I'm now a 4-time CEO, 3-time founder. And I never really felt comfortable with finance to the extent that I was asking our first head of finance whether I should just go get an MBA, and he told me no, do it. So that very much directly inspired what I'm doing now. But, as in retrospect, though, a lot of the things that I worked on, in my background is in product and growth eventually, right? So I ran product at a company called Zynga. It made Farmville, which many people may have know, and now a public company. But at that company, product management was about modeling. It's about modeling retention and how users come in and how we monetize them. And we did it in spreadsheets. And that really informed how we think about finance at Runway. Mm-hmm. Because what I realized is that, from a first principle perspective, financial models are not actually different than these product growth models. They're in different units and the terminology is different. But at the end of the day, what all of these models do is they are simulations of something. They let you play forward, time travel into the future to see what's going to happen to the business today and the decisions that you make today. And so I very much take a broader first principles view of what finance is about. And I think that's been interesting for the product and for our organization.
That really has. It's a unique perspective, but I think within organizations and with the finance organization especially, you kind of need to take a different approach to, first of all, get new clients and make it more applicable. But how do you take things like finance with all these different lingos and make it understandable for, finance professionals, but also other people within the company or even new clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of our core beliefs is that tools inform human behavior more than people give them credit for.
Okay.
And so we right now, we live in a world where finance in most organizations is very siloed from the rest of the departments, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a black box. And this frustrates not just the rest of the company, but also the finance leaders, right? Finance leaders don't feel appreciated or understood for the value that they bring to the table, which is substantial. And a lot of this is lingo and it is understanding that's technical, but it's also the availability of tooling to make it accessible and understandable. So by way of a simple example, let's say your model lives on Google Sheets or Excel, and you are a very forward-looking finance person and you want everyone in the company to understand how the business works. So you want to share this model with the rest of the company. You don't. And people think it's because the finance leaders don't want to, but the reason why they don't want to is they're afraid of a few really important and valid things. The first thing is you give everyone access and people might accidentally change something without you knowing. Mm-hmm. That's legitimate. You want to have this locked in operating plan and someone might fat finger something. The second reason is there is no capability on Google Sheets or Excel to hide a single column, and that column is usually called salaries, right? Because all calculation is architected to be done on the front end. And so because the tools don't allow you to do it, people don't do it. And then the finance department and leaders think, oh, they get thought of as this very protective department and people who are very sensitive to who gets to see what, when in actuality, the tools don't even support it. And if you look at sort of the last generation of software for design and analytics, right? Like Figma is probably a good example for designers. Before the invention of Figma, it was rude to look over the shoulder of a designer as they were working, right? But after Figma happened, because it was so collaborative, it was so accessible, everyone lives in Figma, whether you're a product person or a business person or engineer, and it's okay because the product was designed to do that. There is no such product for finance today.
Yeah.
And we think that's a huge opportunity, and it can change behavior. And the behavior is what it is because the products don't do that.
Wow. It's like creating Figma for finance, basically what you're saying, right?
That is literally the tagline for our seed pitch. And it was inspiration for why the company existed. In 2020, I was running a company called Sandbox VR, very complicated retail VR hardware. I was just appointed CEO 6 months ago, and COVID hit, and we were doing scenario planning. And very quickly, our revenue went from tens of millions to zero, and we had to figure out how we're going to survive. We had like 400 employees, went from 400 to 10, and I laid myself off an entire executive team. And 30 minutes afterwards, I talked to our CFO, and our ex-CFO from Sandbox, and I asked him, hey, we have really amazing tools today. We have Figma and Notion and Airtable. Surely there was something better we could have used to do all the scenario planning than Google Sheets. We just didn't bother using it. And he laughed and said, no, this is like all there is. So I talked to the recent team, and that's how Runway got started. So that's actually the direct inspiration. And Dylan, the founder of Figma, is one of our first investors for the same reason.
Wow. So how can that revolutionize an organization if you can have a Figma for finance and accounting team? Because a lot of times, you have these big old spreadsheets, like you said, Google Sheets, you have, these ERP systems like that. They think they can do similar things, but not exactly how you're describing.
Yeah. So I think it's probably one of the most impactful things someone can work on for business. So one of my observations is you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars like implementing something like a finance platform or ERP, and you pay few $100,000, and on top of that, you pay maybe an extra few $100,000 to implement it over the course of 6 months to 2 years, depending on the company. And what happens is you spend all this time and you connect all this data and you have this forecast, but the minute the business changes, you have to like pay somebody again to change it because you can't touch it. It's so delicate and sensitive and fragile. And the other thing that happens is, let's say a department leader, like a product person or a GM or whoever, has some idea about what they're going to do in the business, and they need to model it. The last thing they're going to go to try that is going to start with Anaplan or something like that. The first thing that you reach for is the most convenient modeling tool that's been ever invented, which is Excel, right? And that seed of an idea then becomes a real model. And eventually you have a spreadsheet model in every different department. And so you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for this thing, but the real reality, the real model of how these different departments work lives completely outside of that. And as a result, people have misalignment and there's no visibility. And your great model in your FP&A platform doesn't reflect any of that. And so if you can build something that is people's first choice to think of an idea because it's easier, faster, and more intuitive, the impact is that everyone in the company actually gets to have a real view of the business. A true view of the business is up to date. So when I look at the product, the product growth part of the model, it actually represents what the current thinking is of the product team, what the marketing plan is, what the sales plan is, instead of like sort of maybe a 3-month delayed view entered because I sent a spreadsheet over Slack to the sales head to fill it out and then paste it back in. And the dream that I think we're very close to achieving, and some of our customers already achieved this, is imagine a designer or an engineer or a PM be able to say, if we work on X instead of Y, here is how it's going to impact margin and growth for our company 2 years from now.
Wow.
That conversation does not happen, which is actually wild because we all are working on the business. Everything that we do impacts the bottom line somewhere. That is a possible world. And it's not possible today because the tools simply aren't there, but it's totally achievable and totally buildable.
Well, yeah, it seems like in today's world, if you're budgeting or doing these big old strategic planning things, it's this months and months long processes. You're doing spreadsheets, you're throwing things around. Then you have meetings with the big wigs, and then the big wigs talk to the people underneath them, and then it's spread out to everybody. And it's this long process. But what you're describing sounds like it could be in a matter of days. You're like, hey, this is what we're planning on. This is what we're looking to do. And it breaks down the silos that are today built up in organizations.
That's right. I mean, we have some of our customers integrating Jira into Runway, which, is unheard of for a finance platform.
Wow.
But to your point, it's not just about the annual, quarterly budgeting, right? When you're thinking about the next few items on your roadmap, what your next project is, you should have a conversation and you should have understanding of like, what is this going to move and how does it impact the overall business? And so one of the big opportunities is if you think about how finance has evolved as a discipline, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we all know it's evolving from this sort of backwards looking controls reporting to more of a forward looking decision making strategic role.
Yeah.
Well, what does it mean to be strategic, right? Like it means you have to look into the future, but also it's not just about forecasting the future accurately. It's about understanding the causality of what are the things that you can do today to move the future. And that's underappreciated. And you need better tools for everyone to have that same understanding. Here are the key drivers that drive growth, not just like we're forecasting 10% year-over-year growth or 20% year-over-year growth. Anyone can do that, right? But like it doesn't help you make better decisions. And ultimately, that's what strategic finance is really about, helping the entire organization make better decisions.
So how do you have that conversation, especially with people who've been within the finance function, the accounting function in organizations for years? They've always done it the same way. And a lot of times change comes to the finance team last because there's so much that they're doing. It's hard to implement these types of things. How do you have that conversation to kind of say, hey, you can do something new?
Our main move is to show them the product.
Okay.
Right? So if you look at our website, if you look at our videos, it's very different from a typical B2B enterprise like type of website.
Yeah.
Where you just have like smiling people, like shaking hands from stock photos. Software, like I'm a product person, software is designed to be used.
Of course.
Like you have to see it. It has to be good because if you're not showing off the product, you're not showing people how it can work, then you're going to buy software that is going to sound good on paper because it's really well sold, but it actually doesn't do the thing. And that's our observation. People have been talking about connected finance and strategic planning for like 10, 20 years. It doesn't do the thing. And you have to invent new product abstractions and experiences in order for it to do the thing. And it's a much higher bar. So that's like one component is how we do it. But the other component is, so it's not so much, hey, here's a new way of doing things, please change it. It's more like finance people are already experiencing deep pain and frustration.
Yeah.
And we say, you have these things. Let us show you how you can solve these things, right? That's on a high level how you sell any piece of software. But the reality is like, we're not inventing these pains. They already exist. We just need to go solve them.
I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to just say, hey, this is what's happening. Here's how you solve it. And a lot of times just getting in the door is part of the battle. When you're creating your technology and utilizing these new ways of hitting those pain points, how are you using things like AI and stuff like that to kind of improve and make it a better experience?
Yeah, we think about AI quite extensively, and I'm deep into it. Most people on Twitter follow me for AI. So At a high level, we have a very specific philosophy on AI. And so if you think about like what most people's experiences with AI are, it's usually AI as this separate, almost creature apart from you, right?
Yeah.
The chat interface, you're chatting with ChatGPT. And, there's a lot of high-level agents, and agents are like the separate independent entity that's like going to do a bunch of things for you. That is not generally how we think good expressions of AI should be. If you think about the most economically productive use case, valuable use cases of AI today, it's for software engineers. And the way they use AI is very different from ChatGPT. Copilot, Cursor, and things like that. What you do is you're writing code, and AI is watching you writing code and saying, "Oh, is this what you mean?" And it's going to like help you move faster and autocomplete and do things like that and make your code more understandable, help you write faster as you're working. You don't have to chat with it. You don't have to ask it questions, because the problem with chat is that most people actually don't really understand what AI can do. And if you don't know what AI can do, you don't know what to ask it to do. And it doesn't do anything until you ask it to do something. And when it does do something, it doesn't know a whole lot about your intent, who you are, what the business. And so with Runway, we think about it really differently. So we try to have AI do work for you without you having to ask it. And it knows all the things that are in your model and the context of your business to help you work faster. So one really simple feature that we have, for example, is when you create a row or a formula or a page or a model, and you open it up, there is actually a human English description, readable description of how the formula works. It's just like explanation. For expenses, it's the sum of your headcount, and headcount is determined by like people who have a defined role, and you divide it by 12 to get to your monthly cash burn. And so like it'll explain these things in English without you having to ask, right? And it doesn't even look like AI, but it's in fact AI on the back end. So we believe in this sort of really understated use of AI that accelerates work and makes it more understandable and accessible for people inside and outside of finance. So they don't have to ask you to explain how the model works.
Well, and not everybody can become a prompt engineer to properly ask AI the proper things.
That's right.
And I think that's why a lot of people don't always get all they can out of it, because they don't understand what prompt engineering is.
That's right. I mean, prompt engineering is like basically managing a junior, perhaps autistic, but also very, very, very smart employee, right? And so but like it takes practice. And most people like assume that either it's very, very difficult or they sort of like underrate it in terms of how powerful it can be and how much it can help. And so if we can understand what people's intent is and accelerate that work, we can sidestep that problem.
I think that sounds amazing, and in perfect practice, I'm sure it works amazing, but not everybody's ready for that type of action within their finance team. I don't know that everybody's ready to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing is you don't have to be, right? Like, if you don't want to use it, and that's totally fine. But that's the real difference between like how we're thinking about and how we express AI Runway versus a chat interface, right? You don't have to do anything. You can just do it, and it'll support you by making things more understandable without you having to ask, or accelerate your work without you having to ask, in the same way that Cursor or like GitHub Copilot does. And the way another mental model we have is what we're building is a tool for thinking, right? And that's a very different tool than what exists in the marketplace in the space. Like you have tools that automate, right? That like connect to your data sources and help you actualize your model. You have tools that are workflow tools, which help you make it easier for you to get information and having people fill in budgets and improve all of those things. But what doesn't exist, and what we're building at Runway that's fairly unique, is there aren't really good tools for thinking outside of Excel. And if you are not a very good tool for thinking, people will choose to put things on a spreadsheet, and that's how you end up with 40 different versions of that spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But because we're building a tool for thinking, what that means is we use AI to help you think, not do the thinking for you. And that's the difference between sort of an agent and a creature and versus something that is a copilot that helps you work.
So can we talk a little bit more about that, about a tool that helps you think? Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, the AI tool is gonna make my job easier. But I feel like sometimes we use it in a way that it causes us not to think as much. And so
Yeah,
can we talk a little bit about that?
absolutely. I think that's a super important point, which is why we didn't start. I understand at a deep technical level, like how AI works and all this stuff. But because of that, we didn't start with AI.
Mm.
Because if you think about what are tools that help us think, they are tools that, one, help us offload ideas from our head in a way that it makes sense to us,
Yeah.
right? So the example that I have is when you think about, as an operator or a product person or business person, the business, you think about product roadmaps, you think about marketing plans, you think about hiring plans, fundraising plans, and you write them down, and it lives in Notion or somewhere or Google Docs as a document.
Yeah.
You probably don't think about the business in the form of a wall of numbers, right? So the format of how the model and finance are presented just doesn't map to what is in people's heads. And so part of a better tool for thought is, can you get it closer to that?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to invent things like plans. And you can see it on our site, right? Like, you can now offload a roadmap into Runway, and you can say, we're going to have this marketing campaign, and we're going to improve the product in this way with this feature, and that's going to improve conversion by X. And it looks like a roadmap. It looks like a Gantt chart. You can move it left and right in timing. You can move it up and down, right? And what that replaces is, a really simple example is, you have your spreadsheet, and let's say there's a row called conversion rates, and you say it's 25%. But then you think that in 3 months from now, there's some new sales enablement thing or some new feature that's going to go make that 25%, 35%. So what do? You go to the spreadsheet and you type 35, right, in that cell. And because the formula is like whatever it is last month, every month after that is going to be 35%, right? So that's fine. But the problem is, like, all of the context about, like, why did it go from 25 to 35%? Like, who's going to do it? What are you going to do? Isn't there. And so what we have observed is that this continuity represents, like, something happened. You had to do something to make that number change.
Mm-hmm.
And we created new containers called plans that let you connect that context with your model. And now you have roadmaps and projects, and you can just move them around. And now it's a lot more accessible. And so there's all these different things that we think about. And this is not AI, this is design, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what, a good tool for thought is. So is Excel.
Mm-hmm.
Excel is a better tool for thought because, you don't want to do all these calculations in your head. You can just see it. And now it's a little bit closer to how you imagine it. But there's, like, more things that you can do to make it even closer. And that's how we think about this. It's more of a design problem than AI problem.
Well, yeah, because like in today's world, let's say you're doing it in a spreadsheet, you might put a comment on that field or put a notes thing, and you'll see a note that may or may not make sense, and you'll have to find a document that connects to. But what you're describing is like, oh, maybe click that, and boom, you see the plan that it connects to that shows what's
right. And you can group them, right? So, if you think about, like, let's say you have a plan for marketing, and this is part of our standard demo, right?
Yeah.
Your marketing plan consists of, like, okay, we're going to increase, like, commission rates or, like, spend more on marketing. And it affects maybe like 10 rows,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then you go to the board and you present this plan, and then the board says, hey, this is a great plan. What happens if we push back this plan by a quarter? Everyone has done this. Changing the timing of things in Excel is the worst thing, because you have to, like, find the three things that you were changed, move it to 3 months later, and make the old 3 months the old thing, and then do it for every other row that was impacted. But when you have plans, you literally drag the entire thing 3 months, and you're done in half a second, right? That's the power of having abstractions that map closer to how people think,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, what the tool is natively. And so this is not like a knock on Excel. Excel is designed to do anything really, really
Mm-hmm.
quickly, be incredibly flexible. But business planning is a pretty specific thing. And you can build a lot of more powerful abstractions on the top that make it a lot more easier to understand and faster to manipulate.
So what you're saying is basically, if we have the right tools in place, we can be better strategists within our organizations.
Totally. I mean, like, that is, like, the, story of human technology, right? Like,
Yeah.
everything, like, if you think about, I consider the earliest form of human technology speech, right? Like, speech allowed us to coordinate people within earshot, right? Now it's not in our heads anymore. We can tell people, hey, here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan. And then the next great human technology was writing. So instead of just coordinating people within earshot, now we could coordinate people from great distances and over great times, right? Because we can write down our intents through laws and culture. And the next big invention was like, okay, now we can like talk to people instantaneously across the ocean, right? The telegraph and email and the internet. And as in modern days, in the modern day, the most complicated organizations are so interconnected. And so you have these spreadsheets that model these different relationships, right? And they're extremely useful because now we don't have to do all these calculations in our head. It'll do the calculations for us. And, we see what we're trying to do at Runway as another step towards that, where, okay, you have these tools that help you do calculations really quickly, but it's disconnected from the level at which business people think about their business, roadmaps and plans and hiring. And we can like create another layer on top of that to make it even closer. And ultimately allows us to coordinate more complex things with more clarity faster. That's how we think about a Runway as a tool for thought.
Yeah. Well, and I think another big part of it is allowing your organization, people within your organization, the space to think as well.
Yeah.
I feel like we're so busy and there's so many tasks that we don't allow ourselves enough space to think, to be able to implement these things properly.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, when there's lack of clarity, the first thing that we reach for is work harder with more time. But like, I think this is a quote from Shreyas Doshi. He was like a Stripe product leader. And he has this quote. He's like, thinking is cheap. You should think more.
Yeah.
Because, if you don't, then you do all this work and some of them can't be undone and it can be very difficult to undo, and it's going to get more expensive later. So think more, which is easy enough to say, but like, how do you think more if you don't have the understanding of the content and the context that reflects the reality and the breadth of the entire business, right? It's so interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we try to solve for that problem today is like, everyone is in their own silo, just focus on your thing, and, smart people will figure it out. That doesn't work in large organizations, right? People make so many decisions, and misalignment happens is because not everyone has the same understanding. And it's our belief that it's actually possible to give people a lot more of that context, like what the trade-offs are, like why the company chose plan A instead of B, what the trade-offs are that was thought through in a strategy, if you give them better tools.
Well, I'd even argue too, it's even harder in smaller organizations because your silos are one person. And sometimes it's hard to break across those silos because that one person is doing so many things. They barely have time to think. And so you can't collaborate as well. And so we have to break down those walls and get communication going.
Yeah. So much of good communication is offloading what's in people's heads externally, right? Like that's why people love whiteboards.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, it's a shared canvas where all get to offload our thoughts and manipulate them quickly. Right. On some level, information technology are different forms of this, different forms of people offloading their thoughts and collaborating with other people to change things and see what happens. And yeah, like in Runway, we think about that pretty explicitly. And again, like our main insight is that the tools that you have to offload these thoughts don't match the thoughts. You have a roadmap thing. It's very difficult to offload that roadmap into a spreadsheet. And a spreadsheet is necessary to understand the consequences of it. But it right now can't contain the plans. So then you put the plans on a document. But a document can't do the calculations. So it's a very interesting and fascinating, impactful design problem.
It really is, because you have, like, especially in organizations, you might have the senior leaders who have written all their plans out in a Word document, and then the CFO puts that into a plan in a spreadsheet, but there's nothing that ever connects those things together necessarily.
Yes, that is exactly one of the core innovations that we've created here.
Wow. I mean, I think that's amazing, and I think more organizations should really think about how do we break down these silos in a bigger way? Because a lot of times we talk about breaking down silos from a leadership perspective, and it's a lot of theories, but how do we practically actually do it so that people are kind of forced to work together based on what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to do it, and one way is not sustainable. One way is like you can just throw money at the problem, actually, and large companies tend to do this. So that is basically what is sort of the role of the embedded finance partner in the department does.
Yeah.
It's like embedded in a project department, and it's able to, is this person who understands the overall picture of the business and is able to translate that. And that's their entire job, right? It's basically communication and this translation layer. And I think that's actually like a really good pattern at larger companies. Like the effort is good. But like, my belief is that a lot of this is because of lack of good tooling. If the tools do not make it understandable for people to use, do not make the model itself understandable, don't make it easy for you to like play with different things and understand the impact of it, you're still going to have to go through a person to do it. And great tools are ultimately, I think, what unlocks silos. I think it's really underrated in terms of how much tools impact human behavior. I mentioned Figma earlier. Another great example is Amplitude, right? Amplitude is an analytics platform. So I was a seed investor in a company, and I invested because at Zynga, I was head of product, and we had a data department. And the way you would get your data is you would email your data analyst team and with your query or what you want to see, and they would go in and write a report in SQL, format it, and email it back to you a day later, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it worked.
Yep.
But what the new generation products like Amplitude and Mixpanel has enabled is that now you can just do it yourself, right? Very, very quickly. And they built obviously incredibly successful, multi-billion-dollar businesses that way. But what is underrated is how much it's changed the norms of teams. So now we kind of take for granted that anyone in a company who works at like a company with small or large just gets to know how many users, how many new users, what retention is, what engagement is, right? That's just taken for granted now. But we forget that like before these tools, that was locked down.
Yeah.
Not everyone got to see that. You had to go through the data team and there was security, but now everyone sees that and we think, oh, that's on the balance a really good thing because people understand where the product is going. There's no equivalent for finance. We just take it for granted. It's like super lock and key. And part of it is because the tools just aren't designed for that use case, right? I mentioned a really simple example where if you wanted to do that and your model is on Excel, you physically cannot do it. The reason why you can't do it is because you can't hide the single column called salaries in Excel or Google Sheets because all calculations are technically done on the front end. Like it's architected from the bottom up to not enable that, to not make that possible. So it means you have to have something different from the ground up if you want to enable that use case.
You really do. Man, Siqi, this has been a awesome conversation. I just really want to thank you for coming on the podcast, for sharing everything you're doing at Runway and all the different ideas. And I really hope everybody checks it out and really starts thinking more. Let's start thinking more.
Thank you, Adam.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.